cloud. It is. And let's go ahead and do a quick review of AIs from last week. I don't see Nira on the call, so I'm not sure if we're able to get into much here. General Kubernetes, YouTube channel, critical. Okay, cool. So maybe we can carry this over next week. Let me actually just do a quick copy and paste here so we don't lose it for our next one here. So that will make sure that next week we circle back with Neuron on where that's at and create a tracker issue for implementing endpoint served metadata. Let's just take a quick look at this. So adding a conformance test. Okay, so this is the X gateway destination endpoint served. What we're talking about here is in the EPP proto-spec, of course, for a while we've had the destination endpoint, the endpoint endpoint subset, and then this destination endpoint served is what that issue is related to. This destination endpoint served as a kind of a feedback mechanism to EPP from the gateway to convey what endpoint was actually used within this list of endpoints provided by the EPP to the gateway. And I want to say that this has been added now for a couple releases, but there has been no conformance test to ensure that implementations conform to this aspect of the protocol spec. Oh. All right, back to the agenda. So, all right, so that is the last action item. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, is there a new action item? No, okay. Let me just get rid of this. So that is the last action item from our previous meeting. Now let's get into today's agenda. I just want to share this here, this PR. So this is the follow-on to the multi-cluster proposal that recently merged. This is adding the Go types from that proposal. Rob has a review. Becca, I'm not sure if he's on the call. He's done a review. Same with Keith Maddox. Keith has given an LGTM. Rob approved. I'm trying to see if there's any other updates here. If Becca is on the call, just want him to add a separate issue and link that here for his feedback. Otherwise, yeah, if anyone else is interested, please go ahead, do a review of this. It'd be nice to get it merged so that we've got some implementations that are moving forward. It'd be nice to at least have an initial kind of lock-in of these Go types. Yangli, I'll go ahead and take a look at this discussion. Are you on? Do you want to provide some context here and walk us through this? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So there's a discussion also in the LLMD Inference scheduler, which was another repo, and also kind of provide plugin to EPB. Where in the use case we have decode server and prefill server, it will pick up both prefill server and decode server at the same time. And then it will send the traffic to the decode server with a header of the prefill server address and port, so that when the prefill server gets the request, for the decode, when the decode server gets the request, it knows which prefill server it will use, and then it will send a request to the prefill server finish prefilling, and then kind of sending the first token back to the decode server, and then decode server can start do the cache transfer and then finish request and then reply sending the response back. So this is current method used in LLMD, and this proposal is to standardize a protocol. So this will be integrated in the how to say EPP. So because like multiple reasons. First is that even this is for prefill decode, but many other techniques also rely on prefill decode like expert parallel. I mean, you can also do expert parallel without prefill decode separation, but it would be beneficial to use it. And like we also see more and more frameworks who need this feature. Like right now, it's only for LLMD, but we also saw SGLang also want to use this, and maybe Dynamo may also be using it. So it is good idea to upstream this one into the APP. So I put a discussion here to get some ideas and also comments, but I can also start writing an issue or start writing a proposal. So, so what is the suggested way? I read the guideline. It seems like a discussion is the first step, and then followed by a proposal, a PR for proposal. Is that a correct way to do it?
Yeah, that's typically the steps. I mean, I don't even think the discussion is, kind of a formal discussion here is necessarily needed, but definitely any kind of major features, which I think this would fall under, is putting together a proposal. So we already have some existing proposals in the repo that you could use as a reference. Um, so yeah, that would definitely be the next step.
Yeah.
Um, and
So
and yeah, I'd like to, after the call, kind of dive into this a little more, but just, the brief explanation of what you shared with us, it makes a lot of sense. Let me see, is there anyone else on the call here? No one else has hands raised. Anyone, I'll
Yeah,
give it a second. Go ahead if someone else wants to jump in and provide some feedback or thoughts.
yeah, no, I absolutely support this. This is it kind of has prior art in LMD, as Yang mentioned, but it just basically what we're doing is we're formalizing this protocol because PD is something that we really want to take out of incubation of LLMD and bring up to Inference Gateway. That's kind of a pipeline we're trying to establish. So this is one of the major steps in what LLMD is doing. We agree with it, and we're trying to formalize it so that we can basically set a banner standard, and then other model servers can support this. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when I think the key is you're referencing VLM, SGLang. You said Dynamo may want to do the same thing. So I think, this is, makes a lot of sense to kind of standardize like we've done with some of the other protocol specs, even the one that I shared just a few minutes ago with the EPP protocol spec. And I wanted to, let me just jump back to a discussion that we had here recently. Ah, sorry. I think this is similar to what we're talking about, supporting like multiple target ports, right? Would that be needed for this pre-fill decode disaggregated serving? Or am I off base here?
Sorry, run that question one more time. I'm juggling a couple.
I'm just because it brings me back to some conversations we were recently having about supporting multiple target ports. I know that there is a recent commit to lift the target ports restriction, right? We
Yeah.
made that an array, and I just kind of bring that up because it makes me think there there is kind of an association between the two, right? Where we need to have multiple target ports, at least from a VLM standpoint, to support the pre-fill decode disag.
Somewhat. So pre-fill decode, and Yang, feel free to jump in here too, but pre-fill decode would be separate nodes, but you can do pre-fill decode with multiple ports, where you have a mixture of experts and you treat each expert as a distinct endpoint. So the two can blend together, but they're not in lockstep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was looking into this recently. I want to see. No, I don't have it up in my history. Cool. Yeah. Well, Yang, thank you for sharing this. Definitely, next step is creating that proposal. Use some of the existing proposals to help act as a kind of a framework for your proposal. Ping us on Slack or however need be to get any support you need. And then typically proposals, you'll get a lot of feedback through the review process, and if need be. Feel free to circle back and put the proposal as an agenda topic, and we can discuss it as well.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Awesome. All right, next we've got Sanjeev, some open topics on inference pool routing. Let's take a look here. All right, Sanjeev, I'll hand it over to you. Can you give us some context on this document?
Yeah, actually, can you give me sharing? So I'd like to point out a few things. So control the cursor.
Sharing. So I think you should be able to now just select share and.
Okay, 1 sec. It says sharing is not turned on.
Allow, there we go. You should be able to. Oh, there you go, we can see it.
Okay. So, there's been, okay. So these are sort of some topics that I kind of run into, some of which we might have briefly discussed on Slack. And they are sort of, it seems like a few different open points here, or maybe it's just me that doesn't understand them, and they all sort of related to having additional xproc servers, like the whatever we want to do with the future version of BBR, or various kinds of semantic routers and so on. So for the context of this discussion, let's consider a topology where there is a gateway, and it has not just the EPP style EXT-proc servers, but also these model or body-based servers. And two examples of that would be, one would be both the current GIE BBR as well as potentially a future evolved version of the BBR, or various forms of semantic router. And the thought is that this first module is doing, okay, so this first module is doing sort of model picking kinds of functions, and the second second ext proc is then picking an endpoint within multiple pods that implement that particular selected model, right? So this is a model picker, this is an endpoint picker. And there's good reason to have both. And in prior meetings, we've discussed various combinations, and so far come to an agreement or loose consensus that it's unlikely that these two would be collapsed into the same ext proc server. So it's reasonable to think that there would be a combination of model picking type ext procs and endpoint picking type ext procs. Okay. So
Hey,
now
just one quick clarification, like
yeah.
the xproc, like the number of xproc servers, it's not, the protocol doesn't define that, right? So, you know,
Mhm.
if you want to have a separate xproc server for and point that to BBR and another one for EPP or same xproc server, and that's kind of an implementation detail. We're just calling out, like, you know, from an EPP standpoint, the protocol definition that is basically the xproc request response that's expected.
Mhm. Yeah. So in the context of this kind of a topology, so here are some topics, some of them related to things like inference pools and probably others. Okay. So because I kind of put this doc together literally in the 10 minutes prior to this call, I could potentially reorganize it a bit more. So, but hopefully we'll get through enough of this to at least get some feedback from y'all, and I'll kind of clean up this doc after this call as well, so that it can be reviewed a little bit more cleanly. Okay. So in no order of priority, here's the first point, right? So the first point is that this is partly a question from you, which is that I see that the inference pool seems to have become more tied to EPP in version 1.0 than previous versions of the spec. So, for example, the spec field literally is called endpoint picker ref. Earlier, it used to be called extension ref, I believe. So, I want to confirm that, or maybe you can correct me, that the fact that it is called an endpoint picker ref is really indicating a reference to any EPP-like object, not necessarily the particular EPP that we have implemented in the repo currently. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. And just to kind of discuss this, so the reason we changed it is in the V1 API review. Tim mentioned, it's like, are we actually supporting multiple extensions, or does it have to basically be an endpoint picker? And the truth is the latter. It has to be an endpoint picker. It doesn't have to be the one we have in the repo, but it does need to pick an endpoint, because that's how inference pool, any conformance test on the gateways, and Danian can agree here, is the inference pool is set up as a backend ref. It acts as a service. And so an inference pool alone is just config. It needs an engine to run, and that engine is an endpoint picker. Whatever that means, don't care, but it needs to pick an endpoint. So that's why there's that association. It was always that way. We just tried to use general terms because I think we were trying to future proof. And as we came to V1, the API reviewers, I think, wanted to dissuade us of that notion, and we had to kind of stand on business and say what this actually was. And so I think that's fair, but it was always associated that way.
Right. Although that then slightly muddies the water when it comes to um, different XProcs, where if you want to use the precise terminology, one is doing model picking and one is doing endpoint picking. But now the so where I'm going with this is um, the appropriate use of inference pool in this kind of a situation, right? Um, let's say that the first approach one would think of is, I need an inference pool that points to this extproc server, and I need another inference pool that points to this extproc server.
So
Uh,
that's not quite correct. And in fact, when you're using a BBR today, you could technically use a BBR however you wanted. Let's say for instance you wanted your backends to be third party, model as a service endpoints. You could use BBR in that way and have no inference pool CRD even installed on your cluster, because you could point based off the model name parameter, assuming they all use the
yeah,
OpenAI API spec. where this is my hypothetical situation, but I'm just trying to make it clear that BBR has no association with inference pool. Inference pool as a concept is meant to encapsulate this pool of self-hosted compute that is necessarily tied to an EPP.
Yeah, I get that. So I was about to get to. So I completely agree with what you said, but just give me a few more minutes to sort of lay out the thing here. So yes, BBR today does not, in fact, use inference pools and does not need to, because it literally is a static attachment using an envoy filter, right? Which is always hooked into the start of the HTTP chain, and you may or may not have inference pools and EPPs, and that's fine. But which is actually a following point here, which is that may or may not be um, the right thing to do long term. Um, yes, you can have BBR without EPPs and inference pools, and but the way it is working today happens to be because it is using a static global filter as the envoy filter, which is hooked in uh, regardless of route. So, like I said, these points are in slightly, there's different. Some of these aspects are in multiple points in this doc. So, so I'm just going to briefly jump to point number 4, which is that BBR is hooked in via a global envoy filter, which is always processed independent of the route, right? This may not be ideal long term, although it has some benefits. For one thing, it means that every um, request that the gateway processes uh, gets sent over to BBR, regardless of whether it's even an LLM request or not. Um, and in fact, you really eventually want it to be a route dependent filter, which is what inference pool does for you, right? So inference pool allows you to hook in a precise route dependent uh, uh, filter for ext proc servers. So an alternative could be for us changing BBR to also get hooked in via a broadened interpretation of inference pool. Because, like we said, at the end of the day, an inference pool is just a pointer to an ext proc service that also implements, quote unquote, the EPP protocol, which means sending back the destination endpoints and things like that. But I think it can easily be applied, if we agree to do so, to both those cases. And that will then also solve this problem of not using this static global filter for BBR. Um, and let's see. So where that is going is um, the two possible methods of hooking in this kind of a ext proc server would be either via static envoy filters, which are not ideal. That's one of the reasons why inference pool. I mean, we do it through inference pools. There are issues with just plugging in static envoy filters, um, and it is route independent. But if you think of an inference pool as a collection of equivalently schedulable endpoints, right? An inference pool is just like, here are an equivalent set of endpoints that can um, serve as backends. That is also what a thing, what a module like a semantic router is doing, right? A semantic router is got a set of equivalent endpoints. The only difference is, in a semantic router, the base models are actually different. So where I'm going is that um, it would be worthwhile to and this may sort of work already, but we will need to be explicit to decide that we should use inference pools for both this sort of ext proc servers and this sort of ext proc servers, meaning model pickers and endpoint pickers. Okay, let's just call category 1 as model pickers and category 2 as endpoint pickers, right? um, and use inference pools for both of those. um, they will follow the ext proc protocol. um,
I think Daniel has a hand up just to
yeah,
kind
go
of
ahead, go
facilitate a
ahead.
more dynamic conversation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just kind of two pieces of feedback is I think like we're starting to get into like implementation details that, we're not trying to get really any further than like the EPP protocol spec, which I put in the chat window. Like even that was, somewhat controversial where, Envoys primarily defines it and implements it. Since then, there has been other XProc implementations or slimmed down versions of XProc implementations to outside of Envoy. So that's something, again, I feel like we're kind of starting to get into implementation details that I don't think we as a project want to get into. And then secondly is just more of a general feedback of just like any like API change, especially if we're talking about making changes to a GA API, which Inference Pool is today, right? I would say open up an issue, describe your use case, and let's kind of go from there. But again, Inference Pool is GA now, so it's going to be challenging to make any major changes to it, but that's just kind of the feedback I wanted to
Yeah,
provide.
I agree. I
So
agree, and yeah, go ahead.
no, just real quick. Some of the so I want to say I see how you're conceptualizing this and seeing the overlap, but I want to mention there is a distinct difference in that a model selection isn't picking an endpoint, so it still has to route to a backend ref.
Mhm.
Which means if you're trying to pack that into an HTTP route, you have a limited set of options. HTTP route keeps it in the order of tens. I think it's like teens actually. It's like 16 different route options. Danny, and keep me honest here, but I believe that's what we saw when we looked it up when we considered it for LoRa splitting. So that's a technical problem. Also, I feel really I think the API could feel co-opted because let's say you have your inference pool, we build it, right? Let's say you have your inference pool for your model-based routing. It then needs to go to a backend ref, which is also an inference pool. So assuming you're self-hosted, you have multiple self-hosted models. So that makes for this, to me, it's this really confusing conception when you could just name it something differently. So, but also I'm wondering, is this significantly better than having someone having a dedicated gateway for AI specific things? So then you have like a parent gateway that handles all traffic. If it's an AI request, it goes to your AI gateway. So then your BBR, that's already been self-selected. So you can leave your BBR at a global level, have as many HTTP routes as you want, and we don't have these technical restrictions, and it's really composable that way. And then I think we could do that basically today.
So okay, you may not have the luxury of two clusters with two gateways, one gateway only doing model routing and one gateway only doing endpoint picking.
No, it
Then
would be one gateway is your like primary all traffic gateway. Because agreed that you don't want the BBR to run on all traffic if you have a mixture of inference traffic and just standard web serving traffic. And you would still have one cluster. You would just have two gateways. Danian, correct me that inter-cluster gateway networking should just work, right?
Correct. I mean, just depending on the infrastructure. I mean, we go back to the multi-cluster stuff, and
Well, does it even have to be multi-cluster? Like, couldn't I have two gateways in one cluster that one points to the other? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, you would, from like a gateway API standpoint, I mean, you could use that second gateway as a backend ref for a route from the first gateway.
Agreed that we're pushing to have two gateways. I understand how that could be, that could be considered an unnecessary extra layer of inference, but I'm just not quite sure how to handle that with the other technical restrictions. Like, where, even not talking about APIs, where in the XProc filter chain, or let's say, even separating from Envoy, if Nginx employs something that is very similar, it still needs to pick somewhere in a chain where it will listen. And I think it needs to be above the route resolution level if you're doing model routing.
So, okay, all good points. So, but I think there's more subtlety and nuance here. So let me, for now, just run through these points just as food for thought. And Kellen, I would definitely welcome sort of having a separate offline with you to be a bit more precise here. So if you're available later today, that'd be great. As well as whoever else is interested, because we may not have enough time here. And this is important because we are sort of doing some experimentation with various kinds of model routers here. And, we want to make a call on whether to use this BBR style global envoy filter to hook in, or whether to, I believe that the current inference pool actually mostly already works. We just have to agree that, or disagree, that it can be used to represent both these kinds of pickers. And yes, there is that issue about the HTTP route and so on, but we will need a little bit more time to go through all of that. So let me just, for now, unless there's another, I don't know, am I holding up some other task on the agenda for today?
No, we don't have anything else on the agenda. If anyone is on the call,
You're showing your email. There's potential PPI in there, so I would.
Okay. So how much more time we have for this discussion? I'm just trying to see which points to focus on for now.
I would say let's give it another. Let's do 10:45, and then wrap it up. And if need be, like I said, create an issue for what you're trying to convey here, and we'll transition it over there, see if we can make progress. And if not, we could circle back to that issue in a follow-on meeting.
I think this is like a collection of issues or collection of topics, but they're all, I think it requires a bit of an offline meeting. Anyway, let me just go through this here, right? So the point number one was that, firstly, agreement that inference pool, even though it has endpoint picker ref, it is referring to this generic thing called endpoint picker, not the particular endpoint picker that we happen to have in the GIE repo currently. And
I think the API spec defines that, right? It doesn't say anything specific that, what we've been always clear, like the EPP is a reference implementation of an endpoint picker.
yeah, okay. It helps because,
right.
again, the fact that we use the exact same word sometimes.
That's fair. Yeah, basically what we're saying is nothing's stopping you from forking this and making it work for your own ends, but there is an expectation that it will use the original DST to eventually give you a viable endpoint.
Right, or you can create your own endpoint picker or call it foo picker or whatever, as long as it's following the protocol specification, right? So
yeah, and I think that so anything that is quote unquote EPP like needs to be precisely defined. And I think, yes, I did see, you have the proposal doc in which you have the endpoint picker protocol, but I may be mistaken. I don't
What
recall it.
preciseness is needed, right? So this is where you can go ahead and create an issue, like look in the chat window and there's the endpoint picker. And you look at the API. So yeah, I would
Yeah.
just say
So
we have some preciseness there, and let's just be more specific on what you feel is missing, whether it's in the actual API or in the EPP protocol spec.
right. So the fact that you want to use that original destination style response sort of cluster, and
It
B,
doesn't say anything about a cluster, right? It's just saying, hey, gateway and right implementation of inference pool needs to follow xproc, right? So if you want to pull up the protocol spec in the chat window, it's just saying, hey, this is the form of communication that's used. We had a lot of conversations about this, gosh, when the project started, and then again shortly before inference pool went v1. And so definitely, like, if you read the protocol spec, if you read the API spec, if there's anything there that you feel is missing, then yeah, I would say open up an issue, call out those specific potential gaps, and then, if we say, yep, we agree, then would love to get, PRs to always improve.
yeah. So okay, things like whether the route cache is to be cleared or not, because again, that's a difference between this model picking and it's related to this original destination thing anyway. Okay, I'll just keep running here because just to make sure we at least minimally touch on each point. Yeah, so there is documentation currently which states that inference pool is a set of endpoints that implement the same base model. I don't think we should mandate that. And
Another topic that's been discussed quite a bit, but we could hold off on feedback. I know, Kellen, you've this is something that's been near and dear to you, right?
Run that by me one more time. I'm getting
That currently an inference pool, right? Endpoints that make up the inference pool. There's likeness there, and one of the likeness is the same base model, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Or
And
at least to generalize that sentence, at least any request sent to the pool needs to be able to be served by any endpoint. However you
right,
make that happen, I don't care. Usually for the introductory level, I just say base model because that's easier to go, what do you mean by that? And then kind of go into like, well, you can alias it. And so it's just easier, more quippy and complete to say base model. But as long as any request can serve coming in, don't care.
right. So that is my point here, which is that in some parts of the doc, it talks about equivalently schedulable endpoints, and some points it exactly says implement the same base model. And this sort of use case here is in fact where you have different base models even, but they are still an equivalently schedulable pool. So I think they do meet the definitions of inference pool, but inference pool docs at different places slightly say different things. So maybe there's just some docs PR to clarify that. Again, I'll open issues or PRs against these points. I just wanted to run this by the community for now. The other one was about specific implementation. So this is kind of a quick question for implementers, like maybe like the Istio implementer and so on. So I know, Daniel, you're involved in the Istio community. Um, does the current implementation, let's say, for example, for Istio, um, care about what is the exact object that the inference point pool is pointing to in its endpoint picker ref? It should be able to hook up the ext proc and the filter chain I mean, the reason I'm saying this is because I was briefly trying to make this work and it's possible that I had some error on my side, but um, you know, is the Istio implementation of inference extension um, checking for what kind of object the endpoint picker ref or extension ref is pointing to? Do you know what?
Yeah, so it uses the inference pool's extension ref to communicate with the endpoint picker. So the extension ref defines a group kind, let's
Mhm.
see, group kind name, port, and let's see, so let's see here to do. So group when it's undefined, right? It's expecting the core group
Yeah, service.
and kind of service. So if an implementation decides to use some other type of object, it just needs to be identified by its group and kind name. And then that object, um, it's optional if port is defined here, and then the failure mode as well.
Yeah. So again, I'm talking about just these two kinds of pickers. So it is a service. It if I happen to have picked a BBR or other kind of model picker like ext proc server, um, Istio should not care about. I mean, as long as it's meeting the ext proc protocol, it should be setting up the ext hooks to allow the gateway to like Istio is not looking for this particular implementation of EPP or um, as long as um, it is an ext proc, Istio should be hooking it up, right? I mean, I'm seeing that didn't work, but maybe I was missing something.
Yeah,
So
from my understanding of the Istio implementation, it does expect the EPP to be run inside a Kubernetes cluster as and exposed by a service. And so it would then require that when you create the inference pool, that you define the name of that service. And based on the endpoint picker ref specification, that service needs to reside in the same namespace as the inference pool.
I see. Or can it, using a reference grant, can it sit on two different namespaces?
I think there's an issue. Confident there's an issue here in the project's repo for reference grants. I know from a K gateway standpoint too, there's an issue there that currently it's not supported. So
Okay, so remind me again, you're saying the inference pool and so which two things have to be in the same namespace?
the inference pool and the endpoint picker service that the inference pool references.
Okay, but not necessarily the HTTP route, whose backend is that inference pool.
No.
Okay. All right. So inference, I'll double check on that one. The next one we discussed previously that BBR is hooked in via an on-off filter, and I think this one definitely needs, well, likely needs a change as part of a series of BBR enhancements. But I think we would agree that hooking it in via an on-wire filter and making it route independent is not ideal long term. So I think we need an issue here. Again, I'll probably open issues on multiple of these to hook in BBR differently, and I think one option would be to hook it in also via an inference pool. Um, the other one, the point number 5, was about clearing the routing cache. So this goes back to the point that because a model picker um, needs to be able to reroute the packet after the gateway has gotten the ext proc back, it needs to clear the routing cache. Um, I don't believe this should need to be specified in the EPP protocol, quote unquote, unless any of you feel otherwise. So, do we need any kind of specification in the EPP off the top of your heads for whether or not the ext proc is clearing the routing cache or not? Or is that just an internal in-band parameter that an ext proc could return or not return? You see, you understand what I'm saying here? Like, does this need to be part of the EPP protocol, whether or not the server is clearing the routing cache, or that just happens to be something transparent to the EPP protocol?
That I need to talk about it more, but at first glance, that sounds like an implementation detail.
Yeah. Okay, and that last one, no, this point number 6 is sort of related to that original DST thing where um, if we had this sort of two-stage picking, um, can we do um, in-band in-band routing for both of these stages, or will we need HTTP route based routing for one of them? So um, I hope you understand. I hope you're getting the gist of what I'm saying here, which is, um, do any of you, for now, have a quick opinion off the top of your head? And I would love to discuss this more detail with you offline. Whether a solution in which both these pickers um, return some kind of routing selection um, that can be processed in band and not require explicit HTTP routes. Or alternatively, um, one of them would require an explicit HTTP route. So I guess I know I'm probably not saying it right, but do you believe we could do both of these routings with in-band routing, with just header-based, content-based routing, and not having to use HTTP routes? Kellen, do you see what I'm saying, where I'm going with this? Even if I'm not saying it right.
No, I apologize. Apologies. It's been a busy week for me.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Sanjeev,
Yeah.
let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
And so my suggestion to you is try to like organize the use case, the requirements and so forth, really think them through. And again, if that makes sense to create a single issue or multiple separate issues that you cross-reference between the two, let's kind of transition it over there because I know even myself, I'm starting to lose kind of what's
Lose
going
the
on
thread.
here.
Yeah. I to wrap this up from my perspective, I think you have valid questions. I think we just need to decide exactly how we want to approach it, what kind of user experience we're trying to create. So
Hey, and Colin, really quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, Colin. Really quick. I know the whole model picking stuff that's been brought up a few different times. And while we were having this conversation, I was jumping over to the discussions and issues. I'm like, where the heck did that go? And I can't find it. So maybe if you do find it, maybe you could throw it here in the notes, so Sanjeev and others can circle back around to it.
The quick TLDR is this was brought up by Huamin, who's part of Red Hat, who eventually went to VLLM, and they have the VLLM semantic router. If you've heard about that, Huamin championed that based off ideas he brought here. Those ideas have also been brought up in the AI Gateway Working Group. That meeting I was not a part of. It happened 5 a.m. Pacific time on Monday, so I wasn't going to make that. I probably won't in the future. But next week they have one at Thursday 11 a.m. Pacific time. So that is probably one I will be at, and they're going to oscillate like that each week. So
Yeah, so I work very closely with Wamin FII at Red Hat. And so I'm actually looking at the part of integrating things like semantic router with things like LLMD, right? That's why I'm looking at these two-stage, one is for model picking, one is for endpoint picking, and all these topics are
Yeah.
related to him. And I did attend the AI working group, and I'm working with Shane as well on this sort of thing.
Yep.
But I do believe this is many of the things here are GI specific because they're also related to how you use the inference pool and the EPP protocol and so on. So that's why I think it's important for this thing as well. So, Kellen,
Cool.
would you be available for a short call later today? I would really appreciate it. I know you're super busy, but it would be super great if we could do a 20-odd minute call later today.
I think that's possible. I will. Let's ping in Slack or let's use the Gateway Inference Extension channel, and we can go from there.
Yeah, because as you can see, there's so many nuances, and no amount of 3-line messages can capture sort of all these things. And then we end up going into tangential long email Slack threads. So that first set of baseline needs to be verbally resolved, and then the rest of it can be through issues and PRs.
Cool. Sounds good.
So, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let me jump over to the agenda really quick. I looked a couple times, didn't see anything added, and so I think that's a wrap. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll catch you online and hopefully next week's meeting. Bye now.
Awesome. Thanks all. See ya.